What's up all you cool snakes and neonates? How's it going? I hope you're all keeping well. So in today's episode we're going to talk about how to handle your snake for beginners. If you're a new snake owner, you're new to owning these wonderful and amazing animals, you're not quite sure how to pull them out of the enclosures, handle them when they're out, or put them back, you want some tips before you get one of these awesome and amazing animals, this is going to be a good video for you. I want to make a couple of things clear before we get into this. This is not a how to go out into the wild and start handling and grabbing random snakes out of the wild. This is how to handle your captive bred, your pet snake. This is not how to go out and mess with and get bitten and be a silly person with wild animals. Also, this is more of a beginner snake episode. There are individuals and there are species that have different requirements and that are a little bit varied and different. This is more for your more basic species and a basic sort of guide, a basic layer, if you will, for handling your snake. With that being said, let's get into the good stuff. So you've just brought your brand new snake home, or it's just been delivered to your house from a reputable breeder. What should you do? You hear everyone on the internet talks about leaving the animal for a week to calm down, to settle in. Truth is, I have never let an animal settle in for a week, sometimes even as few as a few hours. So you get your new animal home, you get the box in front of you, you open up that box, take the animal out, give it a quick inspection, give it a quick check over, make sure everything is fine on the animal. Then you give them a wee soak so they get a drink and rehydrate, then pop them in their enclosure. You leave them for about 24 hours is usually on average what I try and leave them for. Sometimes I'll even take them out like 7 hours later or something like that, but 24 hours is more than enough. The way to think about it is these animals are in jail cells. They're in these boring boxes. You go and sit in your kitchen for 24 hours and you're going to be pretty familiar with it pretty quickly. So leaving them for a week is only going to allow them to fester and get scared and not sure what's happening. So I always leave my animals about 24 hours. Some species may be a little bit longer before I bring them out and start socializing them. So when you're talking about bringing your animals out, snakes live in 3 modes: think mode, feed mode, and defensive mode. There is a 4th mode, but this is a child-friendly channel. We'll maybe talk about that in other videos. But these guys live in these main modes, and that is, you want to handle them in thinking mode. You want the animal to be thinking logically, not fixated on food or not feeling scared. So before you bring your animal out, you want to make sure that it's not in feed mode and it's not in defensive mode. Feed mode is easy to work with. You can hook train an animal, which is where you stroke the animal with a hook to reinforce and train the animal to recognize that they're being pet. It is handling time, it's not feeding time. I tend to do this with the larger species and more food orientated species. Defensive mode is a little bit more tricky to get rid of. It is a mindset that the animal is scared. So reptiles don't feel love, they can feel trust, and you build that trust up over time, so through reinforcing positive interactions. Defensive mode's a little bit trickier to get rid of. It's a time consuming process of just reassuring the animal that you're not going to hurt it. The animal is not in any danger. There is a fairly easy way to tell a difference between defensive and food orientated. And I've not got a lot of memory left, my friend, so I'm hoping that this snake is going to do this. I'm going to pull the thing here. He was fed the other day. If the snake comes running up to you, he's not going to do it because he was fed just the other day. But snakes are not like dogs. They do not show affection. It's not like a Labrador that runs up to you after a hard day's work. If they're running up to you, if they're showing an interest in you, that's because they're looking for one thing: food. So if your snake comes charging up to you, it's in food mode. If the movements are quick and jolty, it's in food mode. Tongue flicks are short and quick, it's in food mode. If there are no tongue flicks, the snake is either asleep or preparing to defend itself. So you see Gimli here, his neck movements are quite quick. Even though I'm poking the beast right now, he's quite quick. He is in feed mode. So I'm in the middle of tap training him just now. So I give him a stroke with the tap, with the hook. You see that? Look, you see he's turned his head to the hook. That is food mode, 100%. Look at that. You see him charging up to the hook there. He's not being curious. Well, he is being curious, but he's not looking for cuddles. He's not looking for pets. He's looking for food. If I was to put my hand in there, he would have had it. So what you want to do when you're hook training an animal is you want to get it to the point that instead of showing you interest, the animal starts to run away. So we want to get him to the point of running away. Now, this guy stays in food mode for actually about 3 days after he's been fed. So he was fed on Monday. This is Wednesday. So there we go. You see that? See how he's starting to move away now? Look, you see he's trying to get away. So now we're out of feeding mode. We're into thinking mode. It's retreat time. So this would be the ideal time to pull him out. I'm not going to pull him out because I'm in the middle of doing waters. But there you go. That was the change there. You see, in 1 second he was interested in the hook. That was him in feeding mode. And then he ran from the hook. That was him out of feeding mode and into thinking mode. If he was in defensive mode, he would literally be defending himself. If they try and retreat and they've got nowhere to go to, that's when they will resort to defensive mode. So there is a big difference. But feed mode and defensive mode do get mistaken for each other quite regularly. And let's just take a moment to appreciate how stunning this little snake here is. Woohoo! Beautiful snake. So there we go. Our Gimli. He's actually doing really well with his training at the moment, guys. We've been handling him and things like that, and his feeding mode is coming out of him slowly. But this is an advanced species of snake. This is not a snake for beginners. I was just using him as a guide to sort of tap training effectiveness and how to read when the tap training is working. So getting the snake out. Pop the lid off here, open your glass, whatever. You're getting ready to get the snake out. Now, when you're pulling the snake out, you want to be swift and confident when it comes to pulling the animal out. You don't want to be going in and out of the enclosure. You don't want to be psyching yourself up. I've seen so many people go, oh, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm out. I can't grab it. Oh, no. And they're just mucking about. They're stressing the snake out and just making the situation a little bit worse for themselves. So when you pull the snake out, you want to be swift. Now, Cookie here is under her hide. There's a large chance when you go in to take your snake out, it's going to be under its hide. If it's under its hide, I never recommend putting your hand in the front of the hide and picking it up because the head could be right there. They're ambush predators. Put your hand right in there. It just sees a heat source or sees a bit of movement in front of its face. Boom, you could get snagged. So when you're pulling the hide off, I always like to put my hands at each side of the hide and pull it out like that. Snake's there. Boom. Now, when you're pulling her out, I know I'm saying not to muck about, but I know this snake. So when you're pulling her out, right now, her head is facing away from me. You can see that there. See her pretty little head right there. So when you're putting your hand in, you don't want to be putting your hand in front of her face and waving your hand about. Again, that could instigate a feeding response, which we don't want. So you always want to try and scoop her up at a nice bit of the body, away from the head, not in front of the head, and pull her out nice and confident. There was no mucking around there, you see. Well, there was a little bit of mucking around. That's because I was talking to you. But really, hide off, assess the animal, make sure she's not in feeding mode, make sure she's not in shed. And once you know that she's not in shed, she's not in feed mode, boom, just pull her straight out. No mucking around or anything like that. We don't want to stress the animal out or anything. Like I said, I see so many people messing around in the fibs and getting all jumpy and psyching themselves up. Just nice and swift. In, scoop the animal up, and out it comes. And that is the best way to pull your animal out. No messing. Isn't that right, sweetheart? Isn't that right? This is old lady Cookie, a royal python. Sometimes even the time of day that you approach your animals can affect the way that you interact with them. With some nocturnal species like Chi-Chi here, if I try and take her out at night, there's no chance of getting her out. She's very active. She's also a bit more food orientated because that's when it's natural for her to be hunting, with her being nocturnal. But if I try and get her out through the day, this is how it goes. Because she was still sleeping. There we go. A lot easier. If that was night time, she would be racing around her enclosure, hooking onto things with her tail and being an absolute nightmare. So when it comes to handling Chi-Chi, I tend to try and only take her out through the day because it's just much easier on me and on the beautiful Chi-Chi right here. fresh shed. The snake is looking beautiful. Now you've got your animal out, you're handling it. What should you do? Or what shouldn't you do? What you shouldn't do is let the animal dangle and hang like this. It's not very nice. It's not very great. It's not comfortable for the animal. I've seen people on Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of things dangling animals around and flailing around and getting them to bite for the views and things like that. Really, as a pet and as your animal, you want it to be as calm and as easygoing as possible. So the best tips I can give you is keep the animal level or as level as possible. Support as much of the animal as possible, kind of like you're holding a baby. You want to cradle it or hold it as much as possible. Keep the animal level and don't grab at the animal. You'll notice whenever I'm holding the animals, my hands are always as open as possible. I'm not grabbing down on the animal. The animal is sitting on me. The animal will hold on to you. Now you see my hand's open. I pull that hand away, she's holding on. This is called a comfort grip. This is her holding on to make sure she's not going to fall. Just like when you guys are climbing a tree or a climbing frame, or you guys are holding on to something so it doesn't fall or you don't fall. That's exactly what she's doing there. She's not wrapping around me to get ready to eat me or anything like that. She's literally holding on so that she doesn't fall. This is called a comfort grip. All right. Snakes also don't like their heads and tails being touched. So if you've got a grown-on animal, always be wary of that. You'll see that this little girl here, she's an old lady, but she came to us from someone else, and she doesn't like her heads and tails being touched. So you always be gentle and careful. That leads on to my next point, is keep your movements slow and flowy. Don't be jolty and like this all the time. And ooh, like I was mentioning, when you're pulling the animal out, you don't psych yourself up. Be nice and slow and flowy. Try not to ram your hand in her face. Just scoop her nice and gentle and all that kind of stuff. As long as you're gentle, slow, flowy, open-handed, and keep the snake level, you're going to be good. Most animals will return your demeanour. So if you're nice and slow and calm, they're going to be nice and slow and calm. If you're going to be neurotic and energetic and a bit threatening to the animal's going to respond to that in a completely different way. So that is how to handle your snakes there, guys. When shouldn't you handle your snakes? Well, I'll tell you. There are two main times you shouldn't handle your snake. One being after it's fed. This is why you should never feed your snake in a separate enclosure, because once that snake is food in its belly, you're handling it well. It's uncomfortable. You can actually force that snake to regurgitate. And also, as I mentioned, they live in modes and they're sort of locked in those modes once they're in them. So if you feed a snake and then immediately have to pick it up to put it back into its enclosure, it could still be in feeding mode, and that puts you at risk of getting a bite as well. So you never really want to handle your snake for at least 24 to 48 hours after they've fed. I usually leave my smaller snakes 48 hours, and then I usually leave the bigger snakes up to about 4 days before I handle them, just to make sure that meal is fully digested and it's not going to be uncomfortable when I'm holding the animal. The other time you should not handle your animal is when they are in blue. This is when they're going into shed. They have a layer of fluid that builds up between the old skin and the new skin. They also have a layer of skin over their eyes called the eye cap. And of course that layer of fluid builds up between the old and new layer of skin on the eye cap and causes them to go blind. So you can imagine being a small animal, being handled and picked up and thrown about. When you're blind, it's going to be quite scary. So it's scary for the animal as well. So you want to try not to handle the animal when it's in shed. Of course, there are some times that can't be avoided, like so you have to intervene for some sort of veterinary treatment or whatever, but try and not handle your animal when it's in shed when necessary. Okay? And those are two main times you should avoid handling your animal. So the next question you may have is, how long do I want to handle my snake for? The answer is it all depends on the snake you have. I like to get my snakes as young as possible. Usually once they've had their first couple of meals with their breeder, I want them in my care so that I can start working with them and socializing them as quickly as possible. With Gimli and Ruby here, things were a little bit different because they spent about 2 years with breeders or with other people who just sort of kept them in rack systems and they weren't socialized a hell of a lot. So there was a bit of damage done there or a bit of opportunity missed to socialise these animals and get them used to being handled. Which is why I say never leave your animals too long after getting them home. So they're just the same as sort of dogs and things like that. They just need some socialisation and training. So this little girl here, when she first came to me, you can see how she's holding on to my arm there with that comfort grip. She wouldn't even do that. She wouldn't hold on. She was really bad at handling. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't nasty. She was just really awful at climbing and things like that because she'd lived her life in a rack system. Now, Gimli had a bit of good care with my friend before me, but he's still taking a fair bit of work to socialise him. He's very flinchy when you touch him, and what I mean by that is when you touch him, he jerks away from you, and this girl will do the same. I am working with the two of them, and they are coming along slowly. But if you've got an animal like that that's a little bit unsure, you want to end the handling session quite quickly on a good note. So you pull them out, have a little hold for 5 minutes, make sure they're nice and relaxed and calm, and pop them back in. This is because you are ending the handling session on a good note. Like I mentioned before, they are living in these boxes. It's like a jail cell. It gets old quickly. They're living in there with their own thoughts, so to speak. So if you end that session with this panicked snake, with a snake that's not enjoying the handling session, it's going to sit in that box and it's going to think the whole time, that was horrible. I really don't want to do that again. But if you take the snake out and it's unsure and then it calms down and then you pop it back in there, while it's still calm, no matter how short the handling session was, it's going to think, that wasn't so bad actually, while the whole time it's in there. So you want to end that handling session. The last thought that goes through that snake's mind as you're putting it in is going to be what it thinks of for 24 hours, 48 hours, however long until its next handling session, and is going to exaggerate onto its next handling session as well. So you want to always end that handling session on a good note. And so this is particularly important with young snakes that you're training. As they get older, you can keep them out longer, you can do more with them. She is coming along nicely. We're getting there. We're managing to touch her with minimal flinching. She's doing really well. She's doing fantastically. Sometimes a good place to approach is under the chin. It can instigate them to come forward and start climbing, as you've seen she just did there. She puts her hand out, so I very slowly and gently, like I mentioned before, put my hand under that chin and let her sort of wander up onto my chin. It can get her moving. It gets that tongue coming out, and you can see that there. She's got a nice, look at those long, slow tongue flicks. So this snake is in pure thinking mode right now. Hello, sweetheart. This snake is just absolutely wonderful. She's an absolute sweetheart. She was just a bit unsure of people when we first got her, but now she's calming down. She's doing wonderfully. Things might change when we breed her and we start taking her babies off of her, but if you're looking at keeping your pets, you want to put all of this work and effort in to make sure that you have a wonderfully handleable animal. Even the animals that we plan on breeding, we only plan on breeding them like once every 3 years or something like that. So in between that, they're going to be pets as well as breeders. So we always like to make sure that every animal has as nice, calm and easygoing stay here at the Reptile Rich House as possible, because they are my babies and I want them to be happy around me and in this settings. Don't we, sweetheart? Yes. So, like I mentioned, when you're putting the animals back, there's one more thing, one do not do to your animals. I see this a lot, especially on other YouTube channels and things like that, is when they're putting the animals back in, they try and shoo the animal in. So as the animal's going in, and it's just the back end of the animal and the tail hanging out, they shoo them in, they grab them, they play with their tail, so they get a fright and jolt it back in. And this goes back to that last thought before it goes back into the enclosure. I mentioned before, the heads and tails are sensitive. It's what they don't like getting touched. So if their last thought is, oh, what was that? As they're going back in, they're going to expect that every time they go back in, and it's going to leave them with a bad taste in their mouth as they're festering in that enclosure. No matter how long that snake is taking, I've got some snakes in here that take the absolute mick as they're going back in, and they're in no hurry, and their tail is sort of going up and over and into the enclosure. As tempting as it is to go, come on, in you go, and poke them in the tail, it's not a good idea. The animal's going to get fright. And again, you're ruining trust. So you're always wanting to build trust with the animal. You're always wanting to reinforce that you're not going to hurt it, you're no threat, and that people, yourself in particular, are not a bad thing. Oh, did you get a fright there, sweetheart? Of course that's not easy, as you just seen if you've got a beard, and they get a fright as a bit of hair goes up their nostrils. That's why, as I train my snakes, or as I'm desensitizing my snakes from babies, I always make a point of touching their tails, slowly working towards touching their heads and things like that, not fully forcing it on them to make them uncomfortable. She got a tickle there. Did that tickle? I've never seen a snake do that before. She went like that with her head because it tickled as I touched it. But yeah, slowly working your way sort of up that neck, giving her light touches and just being very gentle and getting her used to being touched. Part of the reason I do this is because we do 0 to you, so it means I can give a snake to a kid. Although I tell them not to poke them around the face, it means that if they do it, the snake's not going to get a shock and it's not going to end in tears as well. So you always want to have your animals from babies and slowly get them used to being sort of gently touched around the head and the tails. And it also makes, if you ever have to administer medication or whatever, it also makes that a lot easier too, because you have to grab them behind the head and things like that. They're kind of used to it and it's no big deal to them. Another little tip I can give you guys: a lot of snakes will be a nightmare to go back into their enclosure. Kind of like putting a young kid to bed. There's a lot of tantrums, there's a lot of excuses and a lot of coming back out because they don't want to. But a little tip that I can give you guys is put a branch in the enclosure. This is her game. She loves doing this. She loves getting up and onto my face. This is something young snakes will do, is to get away from predators and things like that on the forest floor. Young snakes will always try and climb. So sometimes you'll get snakes that try and go up onto the top of your head. That's the reasoning for that behaviour. But anyway, again, to go with that, perfectly in time with that, that's why I put branches in the enclosure. If you're struggling to get them back in, if you put a solid fixed branch in their enclosure, hook their chin over that branch and they'll automatically wander in and hook themselves onto it, especially with the likes of the boas like this. They like to be out and climbing on my face. Watch, let's put all of that into practice right now. So she doesn't want to go back in per se, so we can hook her up. Like say she's trying to climb, she's trying to find the roof of the enclosure, she's trying not to go back in. She's going to make me into a fool, but there you go, look, we can give her that branch. She's going, okay, I'm climbing up, I'm getting away from the big nasty predator that is Reptile Rich. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to plonk the bum into there. Now, like I say, if she was wandering all the way in, like this, we're not going to grab her tail, we're not going to quickly shoo her in, we're going to let her go in her own time. So she's going to go in. Sometimes I will gently, as I'm training them, lift their tail in, but that was as gentle as possible. You don't want to grab them, you don't want to shoo them in, you don't want to give them a fright because they think that's a bad thing. And that's how to put your snake back after you've handled it. So I hope you guys all enjoyed that. Did you enjoy that, Tigger? Was that awesome? That was awesome. I hope that helped you guys out. If it did, hit me up in the comments below if you learned a few things, if you learned some techniques there. If you want to see more of these beginners or how-tos, or want to see any specific tips, tricks, or cares or anything like that featured on this channel, hit me up in the comments section below. Jump in the comments. Reptile Rich, I want to see this, I want to see more of this, or I want to see less of your ugly mug. So hit me up in the comments below with all of those comments. Yes, that made sense, I think. So as always, guys, like the video, comment on the video. You can subscribe through my ugly mug right there. There'll be a playlist for you right there and a random video selected for you right there. For me, Tigger, and the rest of the gang, take it easy, guys. Peace.